Well, I think one thing that we're all in agreement with when it comes to chronic pain care is that there are just too many things that get in the way of getting good care, right? So there seems to be so many roadblocks, U-turns, off-ramps, one-way signs, blinking red lights that people in pain have to maneuver around to get that elusive superhighway to less pain and better wellness. These barriers can be so sneaky and pervasive that we don't even know they exist, that they're there, but they sure do make getting better, it makes it harder to get better and healthier, a lot harder, yes. To discover what barriers to care are and how some real-life people with pain and their caregivers face them with courage and grit, please welcome our problem panelists. Our moderator will be Dr. Bob Twillman, Executive Director of the Academy of Integrative Pain Management. You'll hear more from Bob later in the morning, and our amazing panelists, Rhona Lopez, Katie O'Leary, Dr. Narcisso Flores-Bassinger, and John Bassinger-Flores. Please welcome our problem panel. Thank you, Bob. Come on up.
It's really great to be on the stage with a bunch of experts, you know? That expert term gets thrown around a lot, and sometimes people accuse me of being one, and I say, oh, not in this arena, no, not by any stretch of the imagination. You folks are the experts about what happens when you have chronic pain. And so what we want to do today is, as John said, is to hear a little bit about what's happened to some folks along the way in their path in dealing with chronic pain and some of the barriers that they've encountered. So let's start with Katie. And if you would, each just spend 2 or 3 minutes telling us why it is that you're here, how you got to be someone who has chronic pain, and one barrier that you've encountered in the course of your travels.
So hello, my name is Katie O'Leary, and I have RSD or CRPS in my right hip, and I'm 29 years old. I was diagnosed at age 27. As you probably noticed, I'm pretty tall, and no, I didn't play basketball or volleyball. I was not very good at either. I played rugby, and I tore the cartilage in my right hip and had surgery in 2015 to repair the damage. And unfortunately, even though the surgery was a success, it led to CRPS. And after 6 months of many doctors, procedures, medications, I luckily was diagnosed within the first year. That first year was a major struggle for me. And as many of you know, it's very difficult to get a doctor to listen, to understand, to believe you. And for me, it just, being so far away from my family, I'm from Indiana, and I'm by myself, and I'm lucky that I have a wonderful group of friends that I call family in Southern California. I'm lucky that I have wonderful doctors at USC Keck who provide some of the best treatments available for RSD and CRPS. But it was a long, hobbled walk to get to treatment. You know, and I have to say that the process of getting treatment and the psychological and physical, emotional damage that comes with RSD, that's all part of it too. You know, RSD just isn't just a physical problem, it's psychological, it's emotional, everything feeds into it. And so it's definitely, for me, a struggle to deal with all of those components. And you have to, with everything going on in your life, if you don't deal with every single aspect of RSD and how it affects your personal, professional, and private life and your family life, it can eat you up and chew you out and just destroy you. And I would say one of the biggest barrier personally for RSD and what it has done for my life is simply belief. It's getting people to believe you that you have a real disease, that you're sick, that you need help, that what you're suffering from isn't fake, isn't in your head. In fact, and this just recently happened actually, I was in a minor fender bender on one of our favorite freeways, the I-5 South, and it was very, very minor. And we pulled off to the side of the road, and the police officer, very cordially, we did the exchange of information. She asked what the crutch in my back seat was for, and I said, oh, I have a nerve disorder. 30 minutes later, we get out of the car, we look at the damage, there's not much. And she asks me to stay outside for 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, my leg starts to hurt. I'm standing. I go to my car, I grab my crutch. She immediately comes over and asks me, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I have a nerve disorder, I told you. She then demands a sobriety test. And I'm appalled and shocked. And of course, I pass it. I just have a disability. I'm not a drug addict or under the influence. And I keep telling her, I'm like, I have a nerve disorder. Like that's it doesn't affect my driving. It just affects, my life in other ways. But she didn't believe me. Didn't believe a word I was saying. I passed every single test. She still wouldn't let me drive my car home. I had to get my friends to come pick me up. I was humiliated, embarrassed, and furious. And I called the police the next day and reported what happened, and they agreed with me. It was discriminatory behavior. She was not right to do that. And that's just one of hundreds of examples that people all over the world and all over this country can give examples of people harassing you, telling you that your pain isn't real, that your disease isn't real, that what you're feeling is fake. And I'm here to tell you that there is a community out there that believes you, that your pain matters, that it's real, and that you matter. And that's what I think this summit is about. That's what we're all about. And, I write for the National Pain Report, and, I put my heart and my soul into it, and I try to put as much of my own experiences into it to show people that, I am like you, I'm struggling too, and I'm trying to live my life. And every day is a struggle, but every day is worth living. And so, make people believe you, even if you have to get right in their face. Don't hurt anyone, but, but it's important. And belief for me is the biggest barrier, I think, to RSD and CRPS. So thank you.
Back is killing me. I hope you don't mind that I stand up. Yeah, I have to stretch a bit. Okay, so as you can see, I run my own management consulting firm. But prior to that, when I was only 18 years old, I was living in the dorm in the Philippines. Are there any Filipinos in the crowd? Yay! I was living off campus at Ateneo de Manila University. And there came a point when I actually had to put both my hands under the pillow just for me to sleep. And my handwriting has always been awful. I can't even make art like that. That's how horrible my handwriting had always been. But then my roommates noticed that you're having trouble sleeping, and I've even seen you cry a bit. What's wrong? It just so happens that below the dorm, there was a nonprofit run by a nun, and the nun explained that you might have carpal tunnel syndrome, because the nun herself, she developed it after years of writing with chalk. I was only 18 years old. What could I have possibly done to damage both my wrists that way? I was doing what I felt were normal things. I played the piano, I played video games. I think the last video game I played was Fuji Golf, you know, those kinds of things. I like to type. I was a campus journalist. I tried everything to get rid of my pain. Those who are Asian, you know Tiger Balm, you know Salon Pass. I stank. You can tell me from a mile away, you know. and it was just so bad. And I tried the therapies. It wasn't working. At St. Luke's Memorial Hospital, I underwent a nerve conduction velocity test. Who has gone to that? Yeah, beyond awful, right? Try that on all of your fingers. Yikes, you know. And it was discovered that I had carpal tunnel in both wrists, and all of my tendons were so damaged, and it was also discovered I was born with square wrist. That's the wrist equivalent of flat feet. So I was at actually higher risk of carpal tunnel compared to the average person. And so I had to be operated on both wrists. And they even said the best doctor is not available right now. He's in Singapore, Dr. Cirilo Takata. So I said, find me whoever is the chief surgeon for the Philippine military. If he has managed to fix up some pretty messed up people, he can fix me. And my family did hire Dr. Francisco Altavejos. He has also worked with athletes and others. And even in the operating room before I underwent anesthesia, they said, you are awfully young to go through this. Because most people who have CTS should be at least like, what, 60s after years of plumbing or whatever it is they do. I was so upset because I was in Ateneo on freshman merit scholarship. I was having the time of my life, and this was in the way. And I had to go on medical leave. And my father, who is a stroke victim, he had been in a wheelchair ever since I was the age of 6. He was crying. He said, you are too young to go through this. You know, and my heart broke because he was talking to me over the phone. He was at home, and I said, Dad, don't cry so much. I don't want you to fall off the wheelchair, you know. I had a wonderful boyfriend. He was looking for me in the hospital, and somehow he landed in the maternity ward. And I said, no, that's not that kind of problem, you know. So I had a lot of support. And my doctor was also very intuitive. He also told me that, I need to tell you this. I can tell you're clinically depressed. And you know, in the Philippines, it's not culturally acceptable to see a shrink, but he said, it's not a problem for you to see a psychologist. You go to one of the best universities in Asia. We have a great psychologist who could see you. So that's how I started to get healing also for my spirit and my mind, and tell myself, it's okay, I can bounce back from this. So instead of finishing college in 4 years, I finished in 5, but I had a lot of fun doing it, you know. And sometimes when people see me with these scars on my wrist, at first they ask, did you try to kill yourself? And I said, these are vertical scars. Who kills themselves with vertical scars, you know? Years later, I ended up immigrating to America. I was married for a couple of years. He turned out to be a little too interesting for his own good, so that's why we split up. But I entered the military, and I managed to be wavered in spite of carpal tunnel, because over the years, I've always stuck with my therapy. So the whole Kundalini fingers things, that's hard for me because fine motor movement is not my thing. But I'm very good at lifting cameras. I'm very good at throwing grenades, that kind of thing. I'm very good at cooking, you know, anything that involves the shoulders. I could do that. Unfortunately, while I was in training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, I was injured on the urban assault course, and I developed my second bad injury, which is gemellus muscle hip strain right above my femoral artery. And even though I passed every single physical fitness test, because it's right above my femoral artery, I could not pass the marksmanship course. You need 28 out of 40. After my injury, I could not break 23. And people were noticing I was crying again as I was traverse and tried to shoot at targets, you know. So I was honorably discharged, but to this day, I still teach people to enter the military to get high scores on their ASVAB test. I came home to eventually here to California, and I had a wonderful caregiver, my boyfriend then, Alec. I was in bed for 3 whole weeks with a very bad flu that was affecting my hip, and he graciously stood by me. And I know we're all adults here, so I have to admit, intimacy was a little hard when it's your hip that's hurting, but we managed to get through it. You know, yeah. So 3 weeks before I was going to be sworn in as a naturalized American citizen, a Peterbilt dump truck rear-ended my little Prius C. And I basically got ricocheted, you know, my neck, my back. And then, of course, the guy had the nerve to say it was my fault. I said, what do you mean it's my fault? You're at the back, you know. But I didn't want to cause any trouble. 3 weeks away from naturalization and whatnot. He said, from his license, he was Armenian. And luckily at my church, there is an Armenian congregation. And I asked for, can we get a lawyer who's female, who's Armenian, and who will fight this guy for me? Because if I had to fight him, there's not going to be anything left of him. That's how mad I was. To have, again, a major landmark in my life. I'm about to be an American citizen, and I almost practically went through the windshield of my car. You know, it's interesting how sometimes some chronic pain events happen just when your life is coming together. College, citizenship, intimacy, that kind of thing, you know. So up to now, my lawyer is still fighting for me. You know, thankfully, I didn't have to pay for any of my treatment. I underwent 2 epidurals. Finally, after so many years, I can start using my elliptical again, which is my favorite kind of exercise, you know. I met Cynthia through swimming because for years they told me, don't use the elliptical, swimming is safer for you. But as I said, you know, this triple whammy of pain, it's all over me, but I try not to show it to people, especially if you're self-employed. The last thing you need is to show that, oh, you're some sort of a sob story or something. In fact, for some of because I homeschool students, for some of my students, I actually showed them my wrist and said, if I can do all of this algebra and essay writing with my hands, you can too. But at the same time, I also teach people about ergonomics, which I think is underthought. And I am fortunate that the military took care of my injury. I'm fortunate that my family was of means when I went through my carpal tunnel. I'm fortunate that I can afford my own insurance, but I do understand that not everybody is in that situation. And the heartbreaker of this year, my dear Alec passed away of a heart attack this March. I lost a great person in my life. But he always told me that if I ever outlive you, keep living, you know. You've been through all this pain because you're not about pain. You're about overcoming barriers and being at your strongest and being at your best and inspiring your friends and your clients wherever you go. So if somebody had to ask me, what is the barrier to pain care? I would say for a lot of people, there is a lack of empathy because when people think pain, you literally have to look like you have the neck brace or that, like they would, like it's almost as if, am I like scamming an insurance agency to get money? I hate it when people scam that because there are people in real pain, but people in real pain, they're not always that obvious, you know? So we do need empathy from other people, and we do need to be in positive relationships. One of the reasons why I divorced my one and only husband from years ago, he actually liked me being in pain. He liked me to be overweight and to need him so much, and to put me down saying like, oh, you can't write this, you can't do that. And I said, that's it? No, you have to find personal and professional relationships that bring out the best in you and the other person. And sometimes it takes a lot of trial and error, a lot of internal reflection and practice to really be in mutually and enriching relationships, especially when you're in a lot of physical and psychological pain. So I hope my talk helped out, and thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Narcisso Flores-Bassinger. I am a retired clinical psychologist. When I think about when I started struggling with pain, it was many, many years ago, and I would say around 1993. At the time, there were actually two issues that were going on. I was diagnosed with a form of colorectal cancer, and also I had developed a progressive, degenerative neurological condition that eventually started affecting my mobility, my hands, my general ability to function. I think I can relate to both of these stories. Katie, is it Katie? Yes, I totally relate with the reality that one of the first things that I encountered were people who would not believe you. There was a lack of empathy. There was, you would be disregarded, or pain is all in your head. You just need to snap out of it. That kind of thing. And I know as a psychologist now, years later, I learned that pain is a very subjective, is a very personal thing. And what might work for one person may not work for another. But I think at the time, there were two things that actually worked well. And that was art, and also not so much at the time gardening, but I had already developed an ability to, I developed a really good green thumb. So I like to collect plants and stuff like that. So I think for me, that gave me a source of relief. As far as the process or the story, I would say that it's something that continued, but for example, the cancer came back. I had to have surgery again and again and again and again. And as I said, the neurological condition is both progressive and degenerative, and that also increased over time. And there were so many different things that help or did not help along the way. But I think for me, in terms of expressive arts, which embodies different forms of art, and also the idea that this plant, for example, is dependent on me in the care that I provide in order for it to exist. I think those were two main issues in my life. But the other main issue, and Ron, I think you mentioned it first, is the issue of spirituality. I came from a very, very religious background, and I had already started feeling very, very disappointed with my religion of origin. I was initially born and raised Roman Catholic, and then my mom converted to Pentecostal, and that created a whole big giant mess of problems. When I left home, I decided that none of those were good for me, and I started exploring different forms of spirituality, and I discovered actually that there is a distinction between religion and spirituality. So there came I would say my initial passion before psychology was working in some organization that combined both spirituality and mental health or counseling. And that was initially my academic pursuit. I worked really hard to like in my bachelor's, I was focused on what's the word that we use? Comparative religions, world religions. But also, as I was getting into my master's program, it sort of narrowed down more, and I started focusing on world spirituality, but also modern spirituality, and also what we call modern forms of mysticism. Some would say like New Age beliefs, etc. But one thing that actually was introduced to me when I started working with my master's degree, my master's studies was something called thanathology. I'm not sure if many people know. Thanathology is a study of death and dying. So I started focusing on wanting to work with people who were also at one point or another or currently diagnosed with some life-threatening illness or some kind of terminal illness. And that actually became my passion. And that's how I eventually met John. And that's actually how I eventually wound up in psychology, studying psychology. But again, my passion was not clinical psych. I entered a program that actually combines spirituality and clinical psychology. And that is where I continue to focus my study. Unfortunately, this annoying neurological disorder kept, getting in the way. So eventually, things started getting worse, and then again with the cancer, it started coming again. And I've had multiple surgeries and whatnot. And unfortunately, I was forced to retire from as a psychologist, which was fine. It was fine with me because I didn't like the direction where that was going. And since then, I have actually focused more on the art, on the spirit, on ways of combining that and also nature. I started being more influenced by, I would say, more Eastern type of philosophies or teachings. They work really well with me, particularly the idea of suffering. The idea that life is a constant struggle, and that is what actually brings suffering in our lives, attachments, and whatnot. So in the past few years, I would say I have focused more on, first of all, continuing to build myself. And I experienced a lot of damage, a lot of emotional damage from what I call emotional pain. And I think that's something that's not discussed as often. Along with the physical symptoms, along with the deterioration, the loss of ability. Also, there is a lot of emotional reaction to the pain or to the circumstances that you might find yourself in. And I think that's also something that I'm looking at, very closely. For example, in preparing for this discussion, I was talking with John, and the perfect example for me would be my mom. She went into surgery for something very minor, which was to take care, actually it wasn't minor. It started out to treat a hernia, but then it got really complicated, and next thing you know, she had to have a hysterectomy, and then things just started to get worse. And then they did some reconstruction surgery because they messed up that surgery, and then she almost died, and the doctors couldn't figure out what was going on. So she wound up having more and more surgery to the point that now, she's recovering from a form of surgery that now she's waiting to heal. And the point of that is that throughout the entire process, the waiting to figure out what's going on, how do you name this? The doctors are not giving you any solutions. They're making it worse. You're getting more confused. The sense of despair increases. The sense of being sort of singled out, or that no one is there to back you up. No one has your back. No one is there to support you. You're alone. You talk about pain. People don't quite understand what you're saying. All that emotional stuff that comes with pain also builds up and also creates syndrome. One thing that we know in psychology is that it's sort of like a catch-22. Pain can cause depression. Depression can actually cause pain. So, it's like a never-ending struggle, or what we call a vicious cycle. So those things I do take with me in psychology, and I've rejected a lot. But that, to me, makes sense, that if you're in pain, you're going to be depressed. And if you're depressed, your pain is going to get more intense. And so, again, my other focus then would be how to reduce that, how to cut that cycle. And I think the focusing on myself and figuring things out right now, in my work with other people and relating to them from a human level, is what I think I will then continue to work on. Thank you.
Hello, I'm John, and I'm Narcisso's husband. Just because I know you're all wanting to ask, we've been together since 1998. Everyone says, how long have you been together? Since 1998. So you don't have to ask about that now.
And we're not twins.
And we're not twins. Everyone says, are you twins? Are you brothers? No, we're husbands. We both have wedding rings that are matching. That's the only thing that matches. We do share clothing sometimes, though. So, but I am not only Narcisso's husband, but also I act as his caregiver, kind of from time to time, and then as well on a constant basis. Narciso was already experiencing chronic pain when I met him, and I really didn't know what I was getting into being a caregiver. I have pain every now and then. I experience a headache. I broke my leg a couple months ago, and didn't know it was broken. I thought it was just sprained, and so I hobbled around on it for about 3 weeks before I went to the doctor, and he said, oh, no, you have a fractured tibia. I'm surprised you're walking around. So I dealt with pain with that, but it's all been manageable for me. So to make it short so we have more time for questions, I would say the biggest barrier for me as a caregiver of someone who has chronic pain is remembering that they're in chronic pain, because it's not my reality. So I have to remind myself of that, and sometimes I have to be reminded of that this other person is experiencing something that I don't have the experience of dealing with. So developing that empathic response is something that I've had to nurture in myself and to learn about, so that I am a more compassionate caregiver for someone in chronic pain. So that's all I'll say for now.
Okay. So we've got about 5 minutes, and rather than have me ask questions, I think it'd be more interesting and instructive if anyone in the audience has a question for the panelists, and maybe we can get everybody to weigh in.
Your best advice to give someone on how to best communicate with a healthcare professional team? What would be the best way to kind of help yourself get the information and collaboration you need?
One of the things that after I was diagnosed that my team here told me was that if I leave the state of California, most likely any doctor or ER in any other state will have no idea what CRPS is. So to prepare for that, I put together a binder of, what is CRPS, all of my doctor's information, and my medications. And that's just like after diagnosis. But if you're still kind of trying to find the right doctors or treatment and you're out, like just starting out, I would say if you're feeling a burning pain in an appendage or a part of your body, most likely if it's tingling, burning, shooting up and down, that's most likely neurological pain. And I would say the first step would be to, if you have a primary care physician, see them and have them refer you to a neurologist. And then, just be very open and honest and advocate for yourself. And that's really the hardest part of all of this. I can't emphasize enough how hard it is to advocate for yourself. Doctors will tell you one thing and inside you might be like, well, that drug sounds scary, or I'm in pain, that's not enough, or I don't know if I want to do that. And those questions and those concerns are okay. For example, I went through 2 neurologists, And, eventually, it was an anesthesiologist and a pain management team that diagnosed me. And so that's kind of where I started. And then from there, I put together kind of my own kind of guidebook. So, for example, a year ago, I traveled to Michigan for a wedding. And unfortunately, and this is crazy, but everyone falls asleep on an airplane occasionally. It's, everyone does. But I fell asleep, on my hands, with the tray table down. And unfortunately, given CRPS and my bad luck, I compressed one of the nerves in my hand. And I was convinced that oh my gosh, I just made it spread to my arm. And I completely panicked and went to the ER, and it was in this little town 2 hours east of Detroit. And of course, they just think you're a drug seeker. And so, I have my binder, I'm giving him medical terms for what's going on with my hip, and he's just sure. And then I give him the phone numbers of my doctors, and they finally contact him and tell him, no, she has a legitimate disease, you need to treat her right now. And having those numbers and those references and those backups, it really pulled through for me, because his entire demeanor changed once he spoke to them. He came right in the room, and I thought they tore him to pieces, because he's we're gonna give you whatever you need. And so the hardest part is finding the right pain management team that works for you. But for those in Southern California, Los Angeles, I can recommend USC, Keck, or UCLA. They're wonderful research hospitals with amazing pain management teams. And, in other parts of the country, if you can find just a great hospital with, especially hospitals that are known for their research, for their stature, those usually have just amazing doctors. And so I hope that helped.
I just wanted to ask, I work with seniors, and many times seniors come to me and they said, I'm in pain, and some of them have HMOs. What is your recommendation for me to advocate in case some of those HMOs, they said there's nothing wrong with some of the individuals?
Well, I'm part of an organization called Caring Across Generations, and a part of that, I'm a congregational care elder at my church, so I do have a lot of older people in my congregation who work with Filipina and Latina caregivers and whatnot. Offhand, I know that the knee-jerk reaction of a lot of primary care doctors, and they don't mean to be harsh, but they'll always say it's all age-related. My mother is 80 years old. She's also tired of being told it's age-related, But they might also be the types who will say that the senior also needs to see a psychiatrist or psychologist to talk through things. And of course, for seniors of a certain generation, we weren't raised that way. Why am I going to talk to some weird stranger about stuff? One of the things I would recommend, if you could do some research, and I know this is like a rare breed, but find somebody in your HMO network who specializes in geriatric medicine. Somebody who is not just your average primary care physician or your so-called average oncologist. You need somebody who's actually trained and chose to work with older people. Now, when I turn 80, we're probably the generation that's going to talk to shrinks, because that's just how we are. But for right now, for the cohort that are seniors right now, I would say look for a geriatric specialists, and they tend to be very excellent in advocating for their seniors. Because I have an aunt who's widowed, who's no kids, and I work with their geriatric provider. And also, one thing I've noticed, depending on how spiritual or religious your client is, you may want to reach out through your churches. They may have a congregational care elder like me, or there may be discussion groups that they can join and they can advocate together. Because one thing about growing older, and I'm halfway there, I'm 41, is that is basically that nothing sucks more than feeling you're like alone at something, you know. So try to look for someone who specializes in geriatric medicine. Look for support, especially since some people are not that gung-ho about seeing a psychiatrist, psychologist. Start with your pastor, or whatever church-based groups that you have, and go from there, so that they can also feel empowered in choosing, this is the way I want to go, because nothing pisses off more somebody who's already older that, I've made my decisions all my life and you're telling me to do this or that. Try to be more of their guide in this. And you had something to say?
No, I was going to recommend a pastoral associates. Most churches have someone, well, a lot of churches, but some don't, who are part of the congregation, who have some training in emotional support or in some kind of like counseling. But I would recommend finding out. Maybe your church does have one, someone like that.
And also, speaking as a military veteran, I know it's more common for male veterans of that age to exist, but contact your local veterans organization like American Legion and others. They can connect you. For my generation, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bunch of us first female combatants who will also be needing certain services down the line. But it's important to reach out to these kinds of networks that already exist.
Okay, everyone, thank our panelists, please.